everyone, this is Shalice from Forward Chess, and today we have quite an exciting guest. We have Michael Adams, of course, Super GM and one of the authors of the book Think Like a Super GM. Hi, Michael, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
So let's talk about this book, Think Like a Super GM. Essentially, it's what goes on in your mind. Of course, Philip Hurtado is your co-author. He presented the idea for the book. How did that come to be?
But when it was based on another book, I think that he'd seen that did a similar experiment back in the 1930s with the top players of the day. I think it's quite a common idea, I think, to ask people to select a move as a puzzle position. But our book was a little bit different because we also asked about the assessment of the position. And that's when things diverge quite a lot in terms of solving puzzles. So it's really a puzzle book, but with a lot of additional features and statistical analysis and quite in-depth solutions. I wrote up the solutions to all the puzzles in quite a lot of detail, because really to get the assessment, you actually need to go into quite a lot of detail. And the puzzles were solved by players of all strengths, from fairly lowly club player right up to strong grandmasters. And whilst they were solving, they talked through their thought process. So they would explain exactly which lines they were calculating, what they're thinking about the position, why they're giving an assessment, and you see that. And alongside the amount of time when they reach particular bits of the solution of the position. So it was quite an unusual book. I mean, I didn't know Phil at all. He just emailed my website saying that he had this idea for a book, and he was looking for a strong grandmaster to sort of help to write up the solutions, also to solve the puzzles themselves, to be part of one of the participants in the book. And originally I wasn't supposed to write so much in the book, actually, but in the end I actually wrote quite a lot more of the book than was originally agreed, because it was just very interesting, and I wrote up my own conclusions on the positions that were tested. And Phil also did this himself, but he did it much more from a statistical angle, because that's it. He works in statistical improvement, so he was looking at it from a more mathematical side, and me more from a chess side, I guess.
Yeah, you combined like science experiments with chess, essentially, right? Well, that's what the book is, a bit of an experiment on how chess players think or how differently they think. Was there any kind of surprise there from these findings for you?
I don't think there was huge surprises, but there were certainly things where sort of more detail was revealed in terms of how people think. I think when you're selecting a move, players are often not bad at this, that they make a reasonable job of selecting the move, but lower rated players, the further you go down a variation, things get out of control quite quickly. And also with the assessment, if they found a good move and they had a strong threat, they would almost assess it as though they'd already carried out that threat. They would get very optimistic, and they wouldn't really be very interested in looking at defensive resources for the opponent, or they wouldn't factor into the assessment the fact that it's your opponent's move next, and they may be able to take a lot of the sting out of the threat that you've just made. That was one of the things that was quite noticeable. One of the other things was that strong players, when they found a good move, they're really quite rigorous in checking it and finding the best defensive resources, and then coming up with an accurate assessment. That was definitely one of the big lessons, and I don't think that was something I would have known beforehand, certainly.
Yeah, because in tactics book, you're always looking for the side that you're told to look for, right? For your best moves. But this is a cool experiment to really focus on how your opponent thinks and the defensive resources, because that's chess. We can't just have puzzles where it's amazing for us in every position. Your opponent will have things in response. Do we want to take a look at a few of the positions, or do you want to show us a book from Forward Chess on Forward Chess?
Yeah, hang on a minute. If I share this page, you can see how some of the solutions are written up with the times and the comments about the position. And it's obviously players of differing strengths. You can see the elos on page there. And they're also giving an evaluation where they're giving their process to come up with the move, and then also the evaluation at the end. You can then compare that with the stronger players as we go down
Yeah,
along
even those
there.
were huge difference. The lower rated had such a quick analysis time
Yeah,
with
I
them.
mean that does tend to be the thing, that I would say lower rated players can be prone to excitement, or they will hone in very heavily on one feature of the position, and they'll say
Mm.
that feature is very good for me, so I'm doing very, very well. But often in a position, there's lots of different factors to the position, and they tend to exaggerate a bit based on that sometimes.
Yeah,
So we go down. So actually, some of the Julio Grande and Keith Arkle were two of the other grandmasters who also solved some of the positions in the book. So you can see Keith Arkle's answer there, and I solved all the positions in the book, which were from Phil's games. Some of them were actually also from my games. So in that case, we kind of took the move whether I played it or not in the game. But the other ones I solved. And so here then we actually come to the solution. So a lot of the positions that Phil selected were actually from his own games,
yeah,
positions that he kind of had a problem with during the game, and then he'd go back and look at it himself, maybe with a computer, and then he still couldn't really, he still found them challenging. So I think he found it interesting to get other players to solve them. I think it's also quite an interesting thing because you actually never really see someone's thinking process in real time. Maybe you might play a game with someone,
mm,
you might analyze afterwards, you might discuss a bit, so you get some kind of feeling of their thinking process, but you don't
yeah.
really see it progressing, minute by minute. I just
Mm.
don't think it's really seeing chess very much. So it's quite interesting to read. I thought it was very interesting just to read all the other solutions.
It's like in Queen's Gambit, right? When the board's on the ceiling, like that's essentially what this is. We get to see what goes on in the chess player's head. Just not on the
Yeah,
ceiling, but in a book.
it's a bit like that, but it's not only sort of the calculations because there's a lot more words. I think you're not just
Mm,
calculating
mm,
the variations. So then we're sort of coming to the solution for this one, and you can see I've got quite a lot of depth. Uh, this was actually a Magnus Carlsen game that Phil saw online that he was very impressed with. Actually, quite a difficult one. This was not an easy prophylactic move, which in general,
wow.
prophylactic moves, I can tell you, are quite difficult. And normally, strong players are much better at finding these. It's
Mm,
more difficult for weaker players to see a threat and react to it. And it's also quite a modest move. I think lower rated players, they don't like to make sort of consolidating moves very much. They often want to do more active things. So that's
yeah.
another factor. Another thing I should actually mention about the book is that there are 40 main puzzles, and that when you solve the 40 main puzzles, you get points for each position depending upon how good the move you select is, and also how good your assessment of the position is. You can only actually get the assessment points if you find the right move. After you add all those up, you can actually use them to calculate your ELO rating. So this was
Oh,
another part of Phil's idea, the statistical side of the book. And
yeah.
obviously, it can't get your ELO rating exactly. I think it's within a range of about maybe 200 points. But from what I've heard of people who have done it, they found it reasonably accurate, and they've come in within the range Phil felt that would work. So I don't know if you've tried it or
I
solving the puzzle.
Yeah, I've taken a look at a few of the puzzles and your solutions, and sometimes, like you can see what the lower rates is, like their understanding of their reasoning. It makes sense, but then I see what you say. I'm like, oh, yeah, that too. But I would also be interested to see to actually test out my rating on this. Because, like, from an underrated perspective, I feel like maybe you could surprise yourself, like viewers can surprise themselves of how good their calculation abilities actually are.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always the case. I mean, I definitely got some of them wrong, and some of the ones I got wrong were not maybe the hardest. I've seen people going, I'm really happy I solved one that Michael Adams got wrong, and then maybe not super strong players.
Put that on your
So
CV.
yeah, they
I
were very
solved the
happy about it. I
puzzle.
think that made it worth the price of the
Yeah.
book just for that moment for them. So and you can actually we're just coming down to the scoring, so you can see that's the best move
Oh,
there, and you can see the computer evaluation that Stockfish is giving there alongside, and how you can score the points if you were close to that evaluation. And so then
yeah.
we kind of had a little bit more. So Phil kind of wrote up his thoughts on the position there, and then I wrote a little bit more on each puzzle, trying to give my opinion and maybe what you should have been looking out for, even if you didn't get it correct. What were the key features of the position? So that's sort of a
Oh,
bit about the puzzles. There are actually a few. I mean, there are 40 main puzzles, and then I think we had about 8 other ones where the problem is for scoring, we really needed ones where there was one correct move. Otherwise, the
mm,
scoring system didn't work. But Phil had some very interesting positions that I liked a lot, but the scoring just wasn't very good. It was just a typical position where Stockfish was giving lots of moves, very often just 0.00. But the positions I still kind of liked, so they were also available. And also the final part of the book was also some additional puzzles, and that was to do with eye tracking, which was an experiment that I wanted to set up, and we actually went and did in in the top tech company that does it in the UK,
that
where
must
they
have been
monitored.
so cool. Yeah.
Well, it was sort of yeah, because I'd actually seen a documentary about the football player Ronaldo doing this, and it was the same
Mm,
technology. But of course, in football, it's kind of a lot more spectacular, and they need all these cameras and this kind of thing. Whereas, in fact, for the chess, it's just like you're looking at your computer screen now, and they get you to kind of look at the square A1, and when they've got your eye focused on A1, then they can just start you solving the position, and they see which squares your eye jumps to when the position first comes up. So that was very interesting there. And I think we all did about 6 positions in an hour. And
mm,
yeah, it does show that strong players, they their eyes go pretty quickly to the strong to where they want to execute. But there were some other interesting bits. There was one puzzle with a player, quite a strong club player, and he was really struggling to decide between 2 different moves on different sides of the board. I think one was a move to the B7 square, the other was to move on the H5 square, and he was just really stuck on this decision. He kept on going back and forth. He couldn't, make this decision, and you could just see this thinking
mm.
process, which you're kind
Going
of
back
familiar
and
with
forth.
in a game. You have 2 ideas, and you're really finding it difficult to choose between them. It's kind of this was very familiar to me. This kind of problem.
Yeah. And you have the findings of that in this book, right? I think there's one of the chapters.
Yeah, I'll maybe try and get up some of the. If I can just go to the eye tracking now, maybe I'll go to the heat maps. So you can see how the heat map. So if we're looking at the one there, the green dots or the red dots are where you've been looking a lot during the puzzle. So you can see looking at the black king position in this situation. And also over here,
Yeah.
you can see the green dots where you're looking at advancing the H pawn and possibly the rook going up, and also covering the white pawn on the 7th rank, which is just 1 square from queening. So it's very much like that. But I mean, you actually get a video from the company, which we weren't able to sort of include the videos or put them up online because you only have access to the technology for a certain amount of time, because it's kind of very expensive technology, and they have the only people who have access to it. But
Yeah.
so you can sort of run it through in real time and see how people's eyes jump around. But in the book, we've got the kind of experiments, and I think in a later chapter you can also see how Phil broke this down a little bit more. Uh, Maybe go on one.
Wow. Imagine you could do this in a game. You could just see where your opponent's looking the most. You would be
Well, I
able
mean,
to.
it's it's kind of interesting, yeah. But you could kind of
Hmm.
do it in a game. So you can see the first thing. This is almost frame by frame. Philip's kind of break this down. So the first thing I was looking at was the king on f5. The second thing I was looking at the pawn on b7. And you're thinking about the possibility of the pawn promoting. And then you're kind of seeing that the rook is in front of the pawn. Uh, and then I'm starting to look more concretely, probably kind of seeing that the pawn on f7 prevents any kind of check on f8, so that white
Yeah.
can't promote this pawn. And then I think I'm looking, you can see about the possibility of moving the pawn forward to h4 and then to h3 with check. So you can see probably I'm considering here the line something like h4, rook h8 to threaten the pawn and to give check, and then thinking about taking the pawn on b7. So you can see it's how you kind of calculate the thing. And
Mm.
then you can see the heat map where you're zeroing in on some of the things mentioned there. So it's kind of a very interesting thing. I mean, I talk through mine quite a lot in the book because I knew my thinking process. But there are examples from the other players who solved in the book. Keith Arthur also did the solving with the video camera, and of course other players of other strengths as well.
Wow, this is like one of a kind. There's no other book that has anything close to this kind of analysis of how a chess player thinks. It's
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I
cool.
mean, I wasn't really thinking about writing a chess book, when Phil contacted me. It wasn't something I was busy with other things that I was happy with playing, but I just
Yeah.
kind of really liked the idea of this, and I just thought it would be a very different book. And I'm pretty happy with how it's gone. I've had lots of very nice feedback from it, from lots of players, some quite strong players actually, um,
Yeah.
but also lots of lots of players of different strengths as well.
And the book Think Like a Grandmaster, do people draw parallels between that book and this one? Because obviously that's a classic, right? Think Like a Grandmaster, yellow. And now this we have Think Like a Super Grandmaster. I don't know if you're familiar, if you've probably read that
I
book, but
don't
what
uh,
would you say?
I don't think they're very similar. I mean, the title was actually Phil's idea. He thought it was a very good title, which I think actually it is a pretty good title. Some
Yeah.
people have actually said to me that they like the title, and I think it has maybe brought a little bit more attention to the book. Sometimes having a striking title, but from what I remember, I think like a GM, well, that book's it's quite an old book in terms of. And I think there's quite a bit about, for instance, adjourned games and things like that, which
Yeah.
feels quite outdated. I mean, for many players. I mean, I'm actually old enough to have actually played adjourned games, but
Oh.
for players like yourself, I mean, it seems like ancient
No.
history. It's
Yeah.
a crazy,
The fact
it
that that
seems a
was a
completely
thing.
crazy idea.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, this just seems like obviously the Think Like a Grandmaster. I can't call it the first book because they're unrelated, but he does talk about, the thought process in a game. And this is just I feel a more in-depth modern approach that has a similar approach of trying to show how top players think in games. And this one is just so detailed in the sense that comparing it to weaker players, I think, is a key idea that you and Philip that added it to actually understand the difference in level. Because it's one thing to be told, how to think, but to compare it with how you would think or how someone your level would think is very effective, I think. So I think that
Yeah,
was a very, very cool idea.
top players do tend to be quite concrete, that they will have
Mm.
their line, and normally it will be maybe more than one move. It will be maybe the opponent making a response and a next move. So it might be like, I don't know, three half moves, something like that. And then they have the assessment, and it tends to be quite concrete. I think with lower rated players, often it's much more woolly, and they'll say something quite vague sometimes,
Yeah.
and that's a noticeable difference. Also, end games are very difficult for lower rated players. That was something that was very noticeable. So for the
Mm.
grandmasters, often the end game positions, they were solved really within just a few seconds. It was something that was very familiar to them. They would just say, "Oh, the active king helps the pawn promote," or its opposition, and it's just very automatic for grandmasters. I think there are certain endgame concepts that they're just very, very familiar with and come to them very quickly. But for lower rated players, it can be a lot more difficult to think their way through and often they wouldn't end up with the right solution either.
Yeah, and this comes down to training, right? The biggest chess advice is always do your end games, study your end games. So that, do you think it's more natural understanding for the stronger players or that training that they had done?
I think it's just familiarity that they just have a lot of experience
Mm,
and they're used to playing endgames well, that they're playing them a lot, and it's just that instinctively they know, or they often have a very good idea what the right thing to do is.
yeah,
I think there were examples from Phil's games, so they weren't super complicated for the grandmasters, but for Phil or other players, they could be quite difficult. Just it's not a it's not an automatic process for them at all.
yeah. Were you ever surprised with your solutions, giving the more detailed one later and comparing your thought process to how you did in the experiment? Like, were you ever arguing with yourself, like, why would you think that, or just trying to prove yourself right or wrong? How was that?
I probably talked to than I would normally because I knew that my thought process was going to go into the book, so I tried to go into quite a lot of detail so that I thought that would make for a better book. It's a bit different when you know the solutions, of course. So
Yeah.
when I was solving them, I didn't know the solutions, and then of course when you kind of think, how did I get that wrong? It was so but sometimes you just don't get the right train of thought at all. There was one tactical one that I just completely missed the right move. I got very, I think I found the second best line, and I actually was analysing that in a huge amount of detail, but just completely missed a much, much stronger move. And there was another one, I think it was a Fisher game, and just didn't recognise it and didn't get at all close to that solution. That was actually probably the worst position, I think, for the Grandmasters. I think we all did it. Julio,
Do
Keith, and
you
Nick, we all did
remember
that
which
position.
one it was?
It seemed like a relatively simple position. I think there was a 2300 player, and he solved it more or less, well, extremely well. Anyway, he did a very good job with it. He got a good move and a good assessment, and we were just all missing on that one. But I think on almost all the others, the Grandmasters did pretty well. So in general, we did okay. But just sometimes,
Every now and then.
sometimes people do slip up. It's
Yeah, I mean, even in your games, right? You'll overlook some things every now and then. And it's way different with the pressure of playing a game. Did you feel any pressure solving this, especially like you're kind of going up against other players in terms of time, how long it takes, or I don't know if you were that competitive with it, or were you more for the science of it?
no, I mean I was doing them reasonably, but Phil seemed reasonably happy with the results, so I think he was fairly satisfied with they fitted in pretty well into his kind of scoring system. I think it was satisfactory. There were a couple I wasn't very happy that I thought I should have done better on, but okay, of course, you can't necessarily get everything right. So I was reasonably happy with the scoring, and I think it was better for the book that I didn't get absolutely every puzzle right. Also, I think that was probably made
Yeah,
for it better because then also,
yeah,
then I was able to go into some depth into where I went wrong in writing up the solution. So I think that was also sometimes interesting.
yeah. And the evaluation part, that's something interesting. I haven't really seen it before in a book, like accurately evaluating a position. How do you feel you did with that part of the solving?
Normally, evaluation grandmasters are pretty good at evaluation in general. Um,
Yeah,
they normally have a kind of, and even one. I mean, there was one actually where I think most of the grandmasters went for the second best move, but I completely understood why we did that. And you would definitely do it in a game because it was a very clear variation, and it was very hard to assess the end game. whether it was
Yeah.
winning for white or whether it was a draw. But if it's a draw, it's a draw by black, absolutely by a very, very narrow margin, which actually was the correct assessment, which is why it was not the best move. But it was very clear cut and you knew exactly what you were getting. Whereas the best move, which actually one of the other players did select, it was much more complicated. There were some variations in which both sides were promoting to a queen. It was a kind of, there was much less control of the position. So sometimes that's, I think, how stronger players think in terms of evaluation and playing, controlling the game. It's a more practical idea. But I think I did reasonably well on the evaluations. And I think most of the stronger players, they were normally fairly close on the evaluations. I don't remember many where they were really wildly out. Of course, it's not easy to always be very close to the computer, but you know, if
Yeah.
you're relatively close, then it's still reasonable.
That's so good. Yeah. And in a game, do you ever think like that? Like evaluate the position according to an engine evaluation?
Well, I mean, for this book, really, you were kind of more or less, you could also sort of say kind of winning, clear advantage, slight advantage, perhaps, which is more how you think during the game.
Mm.
So we kind of lined up the assessments with those kind of statements. I mean, during
Yeah.
a game, probably sometimes you will kind of think you're between two assessments. You won't be sure if you're winning or clearly better.
Mm.
So it will be something like that, or you think maybe it's winning, but it requires very accurate play. Perhaps that might be an assessment you have during a game.
Yeah. But you don't think like minus 0.9 this position?
No, no,
Yeah, that seems like a little bit of a waste of time too. That's like too maths brain instead of chess brain.
no. I
Um,
think that's more for kind of people who comment on the games on the internet, but they seem to like
mm,
these numbers a lot.
yeah, yeah. No, people love watching games with the engine evaluation next to it, which is nice, I guess, for your everyday player. But I always find that a bit of a distraction. Like you want to kind of look at the position the way the player is. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're better off not trying to think about the position yourself before you use the computer for sure.
yeah. Yeah. And this book won the English Chess Federation Book of the Year award,
That's
right?
right. Yes.
How how was that? That must have been such an amazing experience. What came from that? How did it make you feel?
Yeah, I mean the reception for the book's just been really good in general. So
Mm,
yeah, winning the ECF Book of the Year was very nice. But of course, there's always a lot of good books published in a year. So yeah, I think that was very satisfying for both of us. But I found just people coming up to me who have read the book and just saying they really liked it, or you know, often they don't often read a book from start to finish, but in this one they'd actually solved all the puzzles and really gone through it and really
yeah.
found it, you know, just a worthwhile book. And that's been the best thing for me, actually.
Better than any award or anything is getting that good feedback, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even in Forward Chess, it was our readers loved it. It was 2022's one of the most popular books of the year. Even the format we have, as you can see, the solution is hidden. So it's cool to solve the puzzles with our tactics trainer. And in general, it's been so well received everywhere, I suppose. And it's for all levels, you would say, right?
Well, it's really designed to be for all levels. Of course, a lot of the positions are quite complicated, and the puzzles do have a kind of scoring system in terms of level of difficulty, and most of them are fairly difficult. But no, the book's certainly intended to be for all levels of players, and some of the positions are certainly easier than others. But obviously, for lower rated players, you may not be getting so many right, and that's always can be a little bit discouraging.
Yeah.
But in general, I think it certainly is intended to be a book for all playing strengths, and lower rated players will certainly see players of their strengths giving their thoughts about the position as well. So in that sense, it is pretty accessible.
Yeah, even if you get the solution wrong, it helps to see a stronger player's thought process behind it. Because in a lot of puzzle books, we just get the answer and you're like, okay, well, I guess that's what's black and white. But now with your explanations, it's nicer to see what you should be looking at, not just, there's not just a clear answer, there's a thought process that gets you to that answer. So even if you are lower rated, it's good to work on your way of thinking and not just solving the puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you have a puzzle book, the solution won't be written up in a huge amount of detail, or it will just
Mm,
focus only on the best move. When I wrote up the solutions, I tried to say something about any move that was suggested and all the kind of candidate moves that were reasonable according to the computer, maybe the top 5 or 6 choices of the computer. So I would say something about a lot of the moves. So hopefully moves that might have been suggested that weren't correct, people will still be able to see some comments on that. Because I think
yeah,
sometimes that can be frustrating when you have a book. You suggest a move and maybe it's wrong, but there's no real comment on that move. The solution will only focus on the correct move, which obviously
yeah,
is interesting, but sometimes people might be interested in some comments on the second, third, fourth choice moves in the position as well.
yeah. Understanding why it's wrong, why something is better, just not just excluding it completely. Like that's not even a thought. So that's nice, very detailed of you. And thank you very much for telling us all about this book. I've personally gone through it. I wrote something about it as well. I tried a few puzzles out myself. Any puzzle I give out, I always try it first. Because you can't say like, oh, people not solving it if I'm not able to solve it. But tell us about your chess as well. Any upcoming tournaments? Of course, you're still an active player. Usually we speak to authors, who are more in the author era, but you're very much active. So what's in the pipeline for you?
Yeah, I'll probably play some events this year that I played last year. I'm playing the Cambridge Open at the end of the month, which was, in fact, it was the first year of that event last year, and I managed to win the tournament. So, yeah, it's actually a very nice hotel in the centre of Cambridge, which is obviously a very famous university town in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's really, really nice sort of playing hall and hotel that Cambridge Arms Hotel that it's held in. So it'll be quite a strong open. So that will be a challenge for me. Some double round days, so it will be quite an intense event.
Yeah. But that's like now, right? We're like middle of the month. So good luck for that. Uh,
Thank you.
it must, yeah, good luck for that. And thank you very much in general. Any last words from you? Any advice to our aspiring grandmasters, our aspiring super GMs?
I
Read your
guess the
book.
best. Yeah, I wasn't going to say that. I don't know. I think when I was young, I always thought the benefits of playing chess were quite underrated. Just playing a lot of games. I played a lot of games on the weekend circuit in the UK, and that was really helpful for me. And I think now, obviously, now people play a lot of chess online and build up their experience like that. And you can see how strong young players can get now, just mainly by playing huge amount of games online. So I think that's always something that you shouldn't underrate as a mean of improvement. Just playing a lot of games and thinking about your own games and analysing them. So to some extent, that was what the book came about because of that in a way, because Phil was analysing his own games, and then he thought it'd be interesting to get other people's views on the games, the positions that he found interesting and difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, analyzing your games also one of the biggest pieces of advice or the most given piece of advice, right? Don't just keep playing so you make the same mistakes. Analyze them. And you've also shown us how to thoroughly actually analyze a game.
Yeah,
So, lot to
absolutely.
learn.
I think particularly the moment, normally when you play a game, there'll be some moment in the game where you're a bit uncertain or you couldn't calculate things as clearly as you would like. And I think it's perfectly fine to refocus on that moment in the game. You don't necessarily have to review if you can focus on the bits of the game that you remember were difficult for you, that's often where you will learn the most, just focusing in on that moment that you found difficult.
Yeah.
The other moments aren't so important, because that would just happen again and again in my
Mm.
experience, that you have the same problems, they come up again and again in games, and if you focus in on them, that's where you can really learn the most.
Yeah. There's a pattern of things you don't understand or things you struggle with. So that's what you know what to work on. Mm.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Michael, Mickey, Adams. It was so great talking to you and about your book. It is available on Forward Chess. There's a link in the description box below. And yeah, thank you for meeting us today and being able to give us an inside glimpse of the Super GM Superbook.
Thanks very much. I hope some people enjoy the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.